Good morning, everyone. I am Rev Jill Washington, and welcome to service at St. Bridget's Spiritual Church of Edmonton. And today is March 30th, 2025.
UK Mother's Day.
What's that?
It's the UK Mother's Day.
It's a UK Mother's Day. Well, happy Mother's Day to everyone in the UK. And yesterday it was Reverend Richard's birthday, so happy birthday, belated birthday to Richard, too. Just letting people know that you're getting older. and a little wiser. A little bit. Okay.
On the wrong side of 39.
Yeah. Aren't we all? All right. So today, March 30th. That means tomorrow's March 31st. And as spiritualists, it's a very important day for us because it's the rise of modern spiritualism. So, as you can see, I have my laptop here. And I'm going to, actually I came across this wonderful PowerPoint, and I'm going to give it, and it's put together by Tracy Murphy, who is an executive director and caretaker and historian of the Fox family and property. And she put this together, and I thought this would be perfect to talk about because she really talks a little bit more detailed information about the Fox sisters and about the Hydesville where the home was built. Okay, so here's a little history. History of Hydesville. Dr. Henry Hyde moved to Vermont in 1810. He built and operated a tavern, bought land in the area, and in 1815 built a small farmed homestead. The area grew with more buildings, including homes, church, schoolhouse, and blacksmith shop, and became known as the hamlet of Hydesville. So the between 1815 and 1847, many families lived in Dr. Hyde's cottage. And 1842 to 1843, the Bell family farmed the land and rented the house from the artisan Hyde. That must have been a family member. And then in 1843, the Bells had a boarder by the name of Lucitra. I'm saying it wrong. Lucindra. And she was 15 at the time. So she came to live with the Bell family during the week so she could go to school. And in exchange, she would help Mrs. Bell, with household chores and go home for the weekends. So one day, a peddler stopped at the Bells and was greeted at the door by Mrs. Bell as if he were an old friend. In his peddler's pack made of tin, he carried lace, thread, wool, thimbles, needles, and many other interesting items. Inside the house, Mr. Bell and Lucinda looked over his items very carefully and enjoyed the experience well into the evening. Later in the evening, Mrs. Bell summoned Lucitra and told her she would no longer be needed and would be going home. This was a surprise to Lucitra because she was due to stay until the end of her school year. Packing her bag, she asked the peddler to bring the dress she had selected to her father's for payment, and he agreed. And Mrs. Bell and Lucinda set out for the Pulver homestead, leaving Mr. Bell and the peddler behind. 3 days later, Mrs. Bell arrived at the Pulver residence asking for Lucinda to come back. On the ride to the cottage, Mrs. Bell bragged about the trinkets she had acquired from the peddler. Lucinda was visibly upset as the peddler had never arrived at her father's house as promised. It was later that night that rapping's phenomena would begin. At first, Mrs. Bell tried to explain it away as a bad dream, but Lucinda was adamant and insisted that the noise she was hearing were real. The rapping noises started to disturb the Bells, but they claimed the noises were caused by rats. One evening, Lucinda went to the cellar to get potatoes for the evening meal and sank into the large area of a loose dirt. Frightened, she screamed for help. Mrs. Bell again insisted it was rats again and ordered Mr. Bell to have the filled dirt and a variety of field stones brought into the cellar to fill the hole. The rappings continued night after night, and when Lucindra's mother came to visit, she begged to be taken home. In 1843 to 1846, the Weekman family occupied the cottage. Family consisted of a father, a mother, 2 small children, and a hired girl. For almost half a year, the cottage was quiet. Then rappings began again. Sounded like someone knocking on the front door or windows. Mr. Weekman searched in vain for the source of the rappings, making complete checks of the outside, and found nothing. So one of the Weekman's daughter felt a cold hand touch her face and refused to sleep anywhere but in her parents' bed. The hired girl swore she had seen a man in the back bedroom, only to have no one there when an adult was present. Everyone was forbidden to talk about it, and the unexplained events were dismissed from their minds once they moved out of the cottage. The house remained vacant until December 1847, when the family of John and Margaret Fox settled in. John Fox was born in New York City and was the son of John David Fox, a soldier in the American Revolution. He married Margaret Smith in 1812, and John was industrious, God-fearing, and honest, and a blacksmith by trade. Margaret Fox was adventurous, kind, and always displayed a common sense of dignity. Margaret and John had 7 children. Their first child, Emily, died in infancy, and in 1814, Anne Lee was born, followed by Maria Elizabeth David within a course of 6 years. For a period of 20 years, not much can be found about the Fox family. Some suggest that Margaret Fox tired of her husband's drinking, packed up her children and returned home to her parents. However, whatever the trouble, a reunion of John, newly sobered, and Margaret would produce 2 more daughters, Margaret in 1837 and Catherine, also known as Kate, in 1839. With the family of 4 living near Cattsville, other family members enjoyed the quiet rural environment of Wayne Country. Settling in for a bit in Rochester with their daughter Anne Lee and their daughter Lizzie, John was contracted by his son David to live in the quiet life in the country. John was looking forward to building a home on the foothills near his only son David in Hinesville. He rented the High Cottage and took over the Smith shop nearby. And on December 11th, 1847, the Fox family of 4 moved into the cottage. It was a long winter, and the families were looking forward to spring. As soon as Mrs. Fox entered the cottage, she said, "This place is haunted," and the raps and the manifestations were heard. Furniture was moved, touch of a cold hand could be felt, footsteps were heard in the hallway to the cellar, beds were known to be moved by themselves. Maggie and Kate were also frightened, but they often slept in their parents' room on the floor. David Fox, who is one of the sons, is the son, one day took one look at his mother and said, "Ma, are you ill?" "Oh no, David, something terrible has befallen us. A restless spirit haunts this house, and we will not let us sleep." David stared at his mother, concerned and listening in silence. Then with a smile he said, "Well, Mother, I advise you not to say a word to the neighbors, because you will find out it will be one of the simplest things in the world." Mrs. Fox, so this is now March 31st, 1848. Mrs. Fox gives the account. "The children in the other room heard the rappings and tried to make similar sounds by snapping their fingers. My youngest child, Kate, said, 'Do as I do,' clapped her hands. The sound imitated and followed her by the same number of raps. When she stopped, the sound ceased for a short time as well. Maggie said in sport, 'Now do as I do. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, striking one hand against the other with no sound, and the raps came as before. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maggie looked at her mother and said, 'Oh, look, Mother, it can see as well as hear.' Kate took one look at the poor mother's face and said, "I know what this is. Tomorrow it's April Fool's Day, and someone is playing a trick on us." John appeared in the doorway. "What's going on? Is it back again?" "Oh, John, what is it? The Raps just answered the children." "Nonsense, they couldn't." "Oh, but they did, Father," and said Kate, and proceeded to demonstrate once again by snapping her fingers, only to have the raps echo in return. It was Mrs. Fox that asked, "Are you a human being?" Rapped once. There was no response. "It is a spirit?" Rapped twice. The response was immediate. 2 raps. "Were you injured in this house?" An affirmative response came quickly, causing the house to tremble. Mrs. Fox asked, "Will you continue to rap if I call in the neighbors?" And again the raps were in affirmative, and Mrs. Fox sent out to get the neighbors. At first the neighbors thought they'd be in for a good laugh at the expense of the family. Once inside, their questions were asked and answered with the correct raps as before. It was David who came up with the idea of calling out letters of the alphabet while someone recorded the answers. Hours and hours went on. The information revealed that a peddler, married father of 5 and recently widowed, had been murdered in the house and his body taken and buried in the cellar for the sum of $500. Mrs. Redfield, one of the closest neighbors, saw how frightened the girls had become and insisted they be taken to David's house. As curious group lingered, and again the gruesome tale given by the rapping spirit never faltered in his answers. With dawn slowly approaching, the raps began to fade, and silence took over the Fox household once more. On April 1st, the digging in the cellar began. John Fox and a few other neighbors entered the cellar, and the digging commenced. Because the house was built on a low ground and a stream nearby, water filled the cellar. They would try once again in the summer, digging what would be tried again with few results. Bits of crockery, trace of charcoal, quick lime, and some human hair were found. Mrs. Fox noticed that the raps were louder when the girls were together, so she decided to send Kate to Rochester with her sister Leah, while Margaret and Maggie would remain with David and his family. On her first night in Rochester, Kate would go to bed early. As soon as the lights were out, Kate would feel a cold hand pass over her face, and the rappings began once again. Night after night, the disturbance continued. Back in Hydesville, Maggie was experiencing the same, cold hands and loud rappings. Mrs. Fox came to the conclusion that even when the girls were apart, the spirit would not rest, so the decision to reunite the girls in Rochester was made. With Maggie and Kate reunited, the rapping at Leah's home was more pronounced and more frequent. It was said that poor Margaret Fox's hair turned white within weeks. Leah started to lose her music students and steady income. Isaac and Amy Post, Quaker friends, were consulted, and Mr. Post suggested using the alphabet as was done in Hydesville, and this attempt was successful. During the alphabet session, the girls learned that not only were the raps made by the peddler, but they were also made by other spirits as well. These spirits came through Maggie and Kate to let their loved ones know that they still live and still loved. At the urging of others, the girls would try to ignore the raps, but they continued. At one point, the raps would stop as if angry they were being ignored. It was at this point where the girls decided that they would dedicate their lives to giving messages from loved ones that have passed on the other side. Despite accusations of trickery, constant mockery, and threats, the Fox sisters continued their demonstration of spirit communication. They organized the meeting for the movement with the help of Eliba Capron of November 4th, 1849. During the lecture, the girls demonstrated spirit communication. Threats and accusations from the crowd rang out. The girls were made to strip their clothing in an attempt to prove that they were cracking their joints. At this point, Maggie was 14 and Kate was 12, and they were young and scared. Thankfully, Isaac and Amy Post, Quaker friends, would come to the rescue, and they took the girls to their home and offered to protect them. They also received the support of Horace Greeley, a newspaper man. But the trials and tribulations continued. The Rochester Democrat newspaper published a lengthy article stating, "The humbug is about to end." Little did they realize that in 5 short months, the sisters would embark on a tour that would send them to Albany, Buffalo, and Cleveland before settling in New York. Kind of stuff we didn't know. I didn't know all this detail before. So Leah Fox from 1888 to 1890. Leah Fox was merely 14 years old when she was married and moved to Rochester. She had a daughter, Elizabeth, or Lizzie. Her husband abandoned her and moved out of state. She became the spokesperson and manager for the sisters and had mediumship abilities as well. Her second husband was Calvin Brown, a family friend. He was on his deathbed when he proposed to Leah, and she accepted. Leah and Calvin were married in 1851, and he passed to spirit in May of 1853. Leah continued working with her sisters, arranging meetings, private circles, and private readings. And in 1858, during a seance at the home of Simon Post, Leah was accused of fakery. It was Daniel Underhill that came to her rescue. Leah and Daniel were married at the home of Horace Greeley in New York City. He indulged on their every whim, including filling an auditorium with every songbird to honor his wife's love of music. He refused to let his wife be subject to anything humiliating regarding spiritualism. So feeling that she had done her part at her husband's request, Leah stepped back from the center stage of spiritualism. Margaret, also known as Maggie, from 1836 to 1893. Perhaps Maggie, the biggest downfall was the fall of the love of an Arctic explorer named Elijah Kent Kane. She met him in Philadelphia during a public seance. He returned the next day for a private reading. Elijah found Maggie to be gentle, quiet, and ladylike. He disapproved of the life she was living and felt that she should be in school. His parents also disapproved of her religion as they were Catholic. Elijah added a bit of brightness to Maggie's life and broke up the daily circles and seances. And in 1853, before Dr. Kane's departure for the Arctic, they became engaged and a secret wedding performed. Maggie had promised to stop all public demonstrations, restart her education, and wait for him to return home. Over the next 3 years, she wrote letters to her beloved, expressing feelings of love, sadness, and extreme unhappiness. She busied herself with lessons in German and music. Cain, overcome with illness, dies in Havana. Maggie would find out when the newsboy brought her the paper. The heading read, "Dr. Ellis Cain dies in Havana." His death was nearly fatal to Maggie. For weeks she suffered with depression. And it's a little bit of Elijah Kent Kane. From 1820 to 1857, he was a famed Arctic explorer, met Maggie when she was 16, secret engagement, published love letters of Kane and Maggie's courtship was published in 1852 to 1857. The love life of Dr. Kane was anonymous. There were many public ceremonies for Kane, but Maggie did not attend. Kane was laid out in Independence Hall beneath a great flag and flowers. It was here that she realized that Kane had taken the secret of their marriage to his grave. Kane's family refused to recognize their marriage, and in the family biography, Maggie is not mentioned, and she is left a small spendent by Kane. But once again, the family tried to refuse her. She struggled for years with grief and emptiness, and in 1888, she left New York for London. She was suffered in pain. She would return to the summer of New York and move her belongings to a small house in West 44th Street. Kate Fox, from 1836 to 1892, Kate Fox was a dedicated medium spiritualist. She was also devoted to her family. At age 23, she had a star role in a seance table. spent months helping her sister Maggie recover from her grief and illness after Kane's death. She was the family correspondent. She was busy holding seances in the afternoon and evening, weekends and weekouts. Kate and Maggie were together on Sundays as a rule. After the death of her parents, her sister Leah encouraged her to travel to England, but she was reluctant to leave Maggie as they both been drinking alcohol heavily. Dr. Bernard was consulted, and it was determined that both girls had to be placed in nursing homes if they would not consent to treatment. Maggie flat out said no, but agreed to abstain from drinking. Kate was in full agreement and was taken to the Swedish movement cure operated by Dr. George Tyler and his wife. She remained there for 5 years. And in 1870, she would leave New York and go to London. She found a cordial welcome awaiting her. She met her husband, Henry, and were married in December of 1872. And he insisted that she continue her private practice of mediumship. Their first son, Fredlin, was born in September 72. Their second son, Henry, was born 2 years later in New York. Kate and Henry had a wonderful life until the passing of Henry in 1881. She became distraught when he died. Fate had struck once more, and she was no longer strong. After 4 years, Henry's estate was settled, and she and her children came home to New York City. They stayed up first with Leah, but Kate didn't like sharing her sons with anyone. She packed and left for David's house. Unfortunately, her pampered children did not fit into the rural farm scene, and she returned to New York once again. Her last 10 years were spent standing by Maggie, being a mother to her sons and struggling with alcohol. On October 21st, 1888, Margaret Fox Kane stood on the stage of the Academy of Music and made her confession. Looking tired and worn, her hair streaked with gray, she appeared before an audience of 2,000 people and proclaimed the rapping noise was a hoax to scare her mother. This became known as the death blow to spiritualism. Public opinion and reactions were divided. It was only a year later that Maggie would recant her confessions and apologize, stating it was for monetary gains. Moved the house in Hydesville. It was moved to Lilydale in 1916. It was taken apart and placed on a barge that traveled on the Air Canal to Buffalo and then on a truck to Lilydale. The cottage was rebuilt and restored to its original appearance. Rapping medium Flo Cortell oversaw the cottage, and a fire happened in September of 1955. In Hydesville, a replica cottage was built in the 70s by John Drummond, and he repaired the stone foundation and built the replica on top of it. John was born in Canada and became a U.S. citizen, and he was in the World War I and carried shrapnel in his head from the war. Although small in stature, it was John that could hold stones weighing hundreds of pounds in one hand and mix a mortar to hold together. John lived in the replica cottage, and in 1983, a spark from the wood stove caused a fire in the cottage. The house was left with the water and smoke damage. Mr. Drummond, age 85 at the time, went to live with his neighbor and vowed to rebuild. He was in the process of rebuilding when he died in 1990. John and his wife, Edith, were buried on the Fox property as his wishes. In 1990, a controlled burn of the cottage was arranged by the town, forgotten, and property became overgrown and neglected. And so there's a Natural Spiritualism Association of Churches, the oldest and largest spiritual organization in the U.S., became the owners of the property known as the Fox property, so named after the family that gave spiritualism its roots. So today there's a monument at the Lilydale. Actually, I have a picture here, but there's that is all closed in, but the foundation of the home in the stone and the way it's laid out, and then the basement, they had the stones all around where the stones were left for the peddler. So they built a big building all around it with windows so you can actually look in and see it, but there's no more walls or anything to it. So that's just some history about spiritualism. And as was it was sad what happened to the Fox sisters in their life as they grew older, and how they were sort of, disbarred or, shown as trickery. And unfortunately, when Margaret sort of disclosed that it was a fraud, it wasn't really happening, because she did it for monetary gains, because she was broke. She didn't have any money, and she was offered, I think, quite a bit of money back then. I think it was even like $1,300 or something like that. That would have been a lot of money. So that's why she did what she did, and then recanted it. But by that time, she kind of left a sort of a scar already on that. And so that's why spiritualism has taken a while for it to grow. And I just have a little bit of information here that I just want to share with you about where it is now. There's a whole story about Canada and spiritualism, and how that started and how it developed and how it grew, and then it became churches. But here's some census here, and it says that in 1901 a census was done, and there was 616 spiritualists. And then in 1911, 21, and 31, census showed a steady increase in spiritualism. Went up to like 2,263. And then, followed by 1941, there was a decrease. And then in, okay, let me see. Finally, the census is based upon the 20% of the data report. Okay, so the last one it was done was in 1981, and it's based about 21% of the sample reported that there was 2,000 spiritualists in Canada at that time. And I think what's happened is that, I don't know that you've noticed a change. People are talking about it now. People are talking about mediumship. People are talking about connection with spirit through mediumship as well. And there's that validation. So there's that mental mediumship. And then, and as you can see, there's psychic developments. People are developing that. People are being more open. There's sort of like a spiritual awakening that's happening. So more and more churches are happening and growing. And I thought maybe, let's see if there's something here. The part that's that they're saying is that there isn't a lot. Like, we have the Spiritualist Church of Canada that sort of oversees sort of the Canadian church, like spiritualist churches, but unless you let them know that that's what you are doing, that so they kind of keep track of sort of the number of churches, but each church keeps track of the number of participants, right? But there isn't a lot of, I don't think they do a lot of numbers about how many spiritualists there are in Canada. So that's the kind of bit of a downfall, because they do that with, the other religions, to keep track of that. So that's one of the things that we could probably get better at as spiritualists. What else do we have here? Okay. Yeah, because it says here, papers of spiritualism, other interest parties often document their experience and opinions regarding spiritualism and the given of survival. Given the national scope of its acquisitionary policy, the National Archives of Canada probably holds more record relevance to the study of spiritualism than any other single Canadian archive repository. Although researchers must wait yet another decade to find out for sure, William Lyon Mackenzie King actually kept papers, because he consulted with a medium all the time, and he actually kept a track of that because he was wanting to connect with his wife. So there's some history of showing that there's people that were prominent people that were connecting with mediums and going to seances, just to kind of, for them to and so that's how they believed in spiritualism. So it's just sort of talking about those kinds of things. So it's just like, we're sort of on I feel like there's more of an awakening of spiritualism. People are talking about it more. Even our congregations getting bigger, and other people's congregations are getting bigger. The oldest one, so BC, the Open Door Sanctuary, has been around for quite a while. The National Union of Canada was incorporated under federal law in April 1929. Okay, so in August of 1978, the SNU, which is Spiritual Nationalist Union of Canada, succeeded after several attempts over a period of many years, changing its name to the Spiritualist Church of Canada. So today the philosophy and purpose of the SCC remain similar to those of the SNU in Great Britain. So it's sort of like they came from Great Britain and started in Canada, again, with spiritualism and the churches and stuff. So lots of information. You probably got download of information, but I just wanted to, because we hear about, and it was the Fox sisters that did the communication with spirit. The other ones that and I didn't understand that spirit was there, but people weren't connecting with it. They were scared of it. They were closing it off, right? And so the Fox sisters, the young girls, decided to have that communication, which started the whole thing about modern spiritualism and being able to connect with spirit. And then they sort of took off from that and started doing public demonstrations and doing seances and stuff like that. So that sort of, and you got to look at the time of year too, because there was World War I as well. And a lot of people lost loved ones, and they wanted to connect. They wanted to connect with their loved ones as well, which also brought more people sort of being more curious and wanting more information. And unfortunately, there are some people who, didn't believe in it, like Houdini. He tried to find ways to disbar the mediumship, or saying that it was a farce and stuff. I mean, some of the things that these girls went through, that was just a snippet, like they had to perform naked, like really? Like, imagine the devastation that must have been for them, because they were not believed. Yet, behind the closed doors and stuff, there were prominent people going to mediums, going to seances, wanting to connect with their loved ones. So the need was there, is that people weren't willing to talk about it. And what's different now is that we're talking about it. It's out there. We know it's true. We can validate it. It's alive. We're here. We can connect with spirit, right? So this is the sort of like the beginning of modern spiritualism. There's lots of information here. You can also, let's see here. There's also a website you can check out, and you can actually go for tours at Lilydale of this as well. So there's a website, the Fox Sisters of Hydesville.com. So you can check that out. So thank you very much for joining me this morning. I hope you enjoyed our talk about the modern spiritualism and how it got started with our Fox sisters. And unfortunately, they had a bit of a hard life, but they're the ones that actually kind of did that first communication with spirit. So we got to be thankful for them for allowing that to happen. And here we are today, connecting with spirit through our mediumship. So thank you very much for being with us. We will be having a second tea on Mother's Day on May 10th. So keep a lookout for that, and we'll connect and see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.